All right, we shall make a start at 1 minute past 7. So, welcome everybody to this experience session for ACAP for psychology. My name is Professor John Reece. I am the Professor and Discipline Lead of Psychology at the Melbourne ACAP campus. Just a couple of housekeeping things for you. This session is being recorded. You cannot unmute yourselves for this session. I think the reasons for that are quite obvious. We're going to have a fair number of people at the session today, so we can't really have people with background noise. I'm sure everybody's become very familiar with using Zoom over the last couple of years. You know what it's like when you're giving a webinar or presentation and there's lots of background noise. So it's been set up so that people are muted on entry and they cannot unmute themselves. So if you do want to ask questions, please put your question into the chat box. We have a couple of people from ACAP marketing with us and student advisors with us here tonight, and they will answer your questions as we go through. So if you have questions about anything that we talk about today, particularly about the administrative side of things, about study options and courses and admissions and application processes and course fees and things like that, please do feel free to post those questions into the chat box. If you have questions about the content of what I present to you tonight, then again, you're welcome to put those questions into the chat box and I will do a scan at the end of the session and ask some of those questions. I won't be answering those questions throughout the session, but I will take a look at the end of the session and see what's going on. You'll also notice that live transcription has been turned on for people who require that support. So I'm sure that if you do use that, you're familiar with how that works. So I have turned on live transcription for this presentation, and you are very welcome to use the live transcription session. So the presentation is going to begin with some general information about ACAP and what ACAP offers. And after that, I will give you my material on the core topic, which is what can psychological science tell us about repressed memories. Now, I'm just going to ask one of our very, very skilled marketing people here, Repetti, whether he is going to take the opening material about general ACAP. Repetti, is that going to be something that you're going to run with?
Oh, that's okay. I'm going to run that one, John.
Okay, no worries. So I'll start that, and then you just tell me when you would like. I'll just change the slides when we need to do that, okay?
Perfect. So firstly, my name's Alex. I'm one of ACAP's national course advisors. In tonight's session, myself and ACAP's discipline and lead professor, John Reece, will run you through an engaging session for memoirs and what they can represent. So firstly, let's take a moment in commencing tonight's session by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognising their continual connection to land, waters and culture. We pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We recognise those whose ongoing effort to protect and promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures will leave a lasting legacy for future elders and leaders. In tonight's session, we'll cover a brief overview of ACAP. We'll hear from one of our current psychology students and then jump into the session with John as we explore long-term memory, repressed memories, false memories, and what psychological science can tell us about those repressed memories. At the end, we'll open up to a Q&A session. However, at any stage, if you have any questions, you can pop those in the chat function, and myself and any of my colleagues will be able to answer those. So who we are. ACAP is an Australian College of Applied Professions, and we have been delivering specialist courses in helping professions for over 38 years now, since 1983. We're a national provider of these programs, delivering on-campus studies in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth, and very recently our Byron Bay campus. We also cater those living rurally and internationally through our online and blended modality. ACAP doesn't just provide psychology programs. You may be familiar with other disciplines such as social work, criminology, coaching and counselling. And we've recently added our MBA to our selection. Each of these disciplines will have their own delivery methods you can choose from, and we're happy to discuss those and what might suit you. Since ACAP was founded, we've successfully graduated over 20,000 students nationwide and having them industry ready upon completion of their qualifications. At ACAP, we encourage and promote diversity. We support students from all walks of life and promote equality, sustainability, and advocacy in every community. We hold regular catch-ups for those who are interested in getting involved, to meet like-minded individuals and to developing lasting connections. We've seen that extracurricular activities and programs don't just boost student morale, but help them to flourish in their studies with peer-to-peer support. So why do students choose ACAP? It is a combination between the support services available and the quality of education. We have a flexible choice of on-campus, online, with on-campus workshops for counselling, educators who work in the industry, and in our student placements team. Students are delivered with supported learning experiences to develop their future careers. Our degrees are accredited with bodies such as the ACA, ICF, PACFA, and APAC, to name a few. And there are 3 intakes per year to make it more flexible to pick up learning for when it suits you. In regards to that, we also have fees that are supported by fee help student loans or upfront payment. We have the various networks and support available to ensure you get the most out of your studies and excel with personal and professional growth. Services such as our student learning support team who run regular webinars and workshops, have how-to guides, video tutorials, and even have their own website where all of this information can be found to give you more independence through your journey. We also have free and confidential counselling service available to our students. So now that you know a little bit about ACAP in general, I'm going to hand you over to Rihanna. She's a current student in our Bachelor of Psychological Science and Counselling. And then back on to our discipline lead, Professor John Reece. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name's Rihanna, and I'm in my 2nd year of my Bachelor of Psychological Science and Counselling. I actually hadn't heard of ACAP until a friend mentioned it to me at the time I was considering going back down the path of study. But the more I looked into ACAP, the more I felt comfortable studying there. And initially, I was really overwhelmed with trying to figure out where to study, what I even really wanted to do, until I came across ACAP. I found it easy to talk to the course advisors over the phone about what would be a potentially good fit for me, and they made the process so simple. I came in really quite confident. When I finished my 1st year of being a student, I felt the most success I've ever felt. It was really powerful and it's motivated me immensely. There's so much support here too. Having a learning difficulty, it is the reason I didn't pursue a degree like this earlier. But there's endless resources, and I mean endless, at ACAP. They made it really achievable, and it takes the stress out of studying. Before ACAP, I studied full-time as a dancer, and I actually own my own dance studio. So it really is true. You can truly pivot what you were doing in life if you just have the passion to make that initial change. One subject I've enjoyed so far is a unit on cognition. Basically covers the application of cognitive psychology to everyday life across a lifespan. It covers off really, really interesting topics such as learning, memory, performance, eyewitness testimony, and neuropsychological disorders. This is something that appeals to me as I'm hoping to get into psychotherapy and John, you'll like to hear this one, research when I finish my degree. I suggest you have a chat with the ACAP course advisors. They will help you figure out even what your passion is and lead you in the right direction. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Rihanna. That's great. Okay, so over to me now, and I'll be running the remainder of the session. But like I said, if you have any questions, please do feel free to tap them into the chat. Now, just before we get started, a content warning that we are going to be discussing some fairly sensitive issues in tonight's presentation. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the issues around memories of trauma and abuse, and more specifically, childhood sexual abuse. So that's an important part of tonight's topic. So I think you should consider carefully the potential impact of that type of content, what the impact might have on you before you decide whether to participate in this presentation. Only you can make that decision, but I'm just giving you that information now so that you can make that decision yourself. Okay, so memory in the news. This is an area that I've got a long-term interest in, the idea of applications of memory in everyday life. Now, here's an article that was very recent, about the case, the current law case of Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell, as many of you well know, has been associated with Jeffrey Epstein, and she's currently involved in a court case where she has been accused, she's under trial for grooming people as part of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse charges. And as part of this case, Ghislaine Maxwell is arguing that some of the memories that she reported from that period were in fact what we call false memories. And we'll be talking about that term, and in order to support that particular argument, she is drawing on one of the world's most famous experts in memory research, a professor by the name of Elizabeth Loftus, that's her on the right, who has made enormous contributions to our understanding of memory and is particularly prominent in the field of false memories, repressed memories, and related topics that we're going to be talking about today. So there's an example of memory in the news. You can take a look at that article. Here's a link, and unfortunately the video for this is not available yet, but here's a link to a story that was broadcast on Four Corners about 10 years or so ago about a very controversial case of a series of therapeutic sessions that involved repressed memory therapy, where very vulnerable individuals revealed, as a result of repressed memory therapy, memories of childhood sexual abuse at the hands of their families. It tore families apart. It had enormous impact on the individuals involved, both the individuals receiving the therapy and those who were associated with those individuals, who it was found were wrongly accused of engaging in sexual abuse. The person administering the therapy was not a qualified therapist, should not have been doing what he was doing, and caused an enormous amount of damage, not only to the clients themselves, the service users themselves, but also to their families. You can certainly read about this story on this particular page. Unfortunately, the actual Four Corners story has now been removed, but you can get information about it if you wish. Very, very important and controversial case. The third one was a case involving another famous person, Roseanne Barr. Roseanne Barr from the TV series Roseanne also underwent repressed memory therapy, and as a result recovered memories of incest at the hands of her family. Again, this caused enormous tension, enormous trauma, and enormous conflict for all the people who were involved in that particular case. And it was found later that these memories were not true. And as the headline says there, Roseanne star Roseanne Barr once accused her parents of incest, then regretted it. She realized now that it did not occur. So there's three examples of public cases that have involved the application of memory and are tapping into the sort of topics that we're going to be talking about today. And they're just examples. There are many, many others that you can look at. So what are we talking about here? I've already thrown around some terms. Let's get our heads around these terms. What are false memories? What are repressed memories? What are recovered memories? What is repressed memory therapy? What are these things? These are all things that you will learn if you come and study psychology at ACAP. In the course on cognitive psychology, we'll learn about human memory, about the applications of memory, and about these particular topics. So this is an opportunity to get an early exposure to that content. We're going to begin by talking about what we call a false memory. Now, this is not a particularly controversial topic, and it's a very well-known topic. A false memory is a memory that you claim to be true, but that are incontrovertibly and objectively false. So there's no question, there's no judgment about whether it's false or not. It is factually false. Now, false memories are very, very common, and they're actually very, very easy to demonstrate. Loftus herself ran a very simple experiment to prove this. She stood outside Disneyland, and as people exited Disneyland, she asked them some questions. She said, can you tell me the characters who you met, who you interacted with, who you saw when you were in Disneyland? Did you see Mickey Mouse? Did you see the Little Mermaid? Did you see Donald Duck? Did you see Aladdin? And so on. Did you see Bugs Bunny? And about a third of the respondents said that they'd seen Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny is a Warner Brothers character. Bugs Bunny will never be seen in Disneyland. He's not a Disney character. So that was a false memory. People reported with high levels of confidence that, yes, they had seen Bugs Bunny, they'd met Bugs Bunny, they'd shaken the hand of Bugs Bunny. They had not, because Bugs Bunny is never a part of Disneyland. It's a simple example of a false memory. So Ghislaine Maxwell is claiming that her memories of these earlier events surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein case are false, and that they're the result of normal cognitive distortion, mental distortion of memory processes. Very few areas of memory have been more topical, more controversial, more heated than the topic of repressed or recovered memory and the therapies that are associated with those memories and associated false memories. And arguments around these have been very heated. Loftus herself has had to have armed security when she goes and gives talks because she's been the victim of some egregious threats against her life. Lives and families of people have been devastated by experiences surrounding these phenomena. It's caused enormous conflict, debate, and argument within legal precincts, within legal circles, within court cases. It's been very, very controversial right from the start. It's been controversial for the last 30, 40 years or so. Now, psychological science has a long tradition of studying memory, of trying to understand how memory works, how memory functions, what the components are. So let's just park the sort of clinical side of it for the time being, and let's step back to the scientific side of it, and let's ask the question, so what can psychological science tell us about these issues around repressed memories, recovered memories, repressed memory therapy, false memories, and so on? What does the science of memory tell us about these things? So let me give you like a 5-minute description of how memory works, or more specifically, how long-term memory works. I think it would be better if I actually titled this, How Does Memory Not Work? Really early theories of memory and early conceptualizations of memory saw it as very much a passive type of process. So the idea was that you as an individual had all of these memories sitting in your mental system, filed away in like a perfect form, like they were documents in a filing cabinet or files in a computer or a journal diary entry or something like that. And they were just neatly organized and stored away in your mental system. And when you wanted to recall that memory, you sort of opened up an internal file and out came the memory in perfect form, perfectly stored, ready to go. So the memories were all sitting there, just waiting to be used in this well-formed sort of circumstance. And this is what we called this is what we refer to now as a very passive view of memory, that the memories were all just sitting there waiting for you to pull them out. Nothing could be further from the truth. We now know that that is totally and completely not how human memory works. You don't flick a switch and play some sort of internal memory of your past when you want to recall. It's not like in the movies. It's not like in the movies where, the screen goes fuzzy and then all of a sudden we see people recalling things that happened in the past and it's like a movie running in perfect form. That's not how memory works at all. It's not like this.
What remains vivid in my memory is my husband struggling with a bunch of suitcases, my little child on my hands, and all of us being pushed up the stairway. And I remember always looking back and seeing my mother and father crying and sort of blowing their noses with their handkerchiefs.
When you're thinking of home, go home on the telephone.
Australia, you ready?
Look, it's a great ad. It's a prize-winning ad. It was an ad. It's a very old ad. You can tell by the old phone with the circular dialer and all that sort of stuff. it was an ad for what was OTC, what Telstra used to be called. And, you know, you've got Barbara Streisand singing Memory in the background and people recalling all these things that happened back in the past and so on. And that's, it's a lovely, artistic, romantic view of memory, but it's actually not how memory works. So how does memory work? Well, memory is, in fact, a very active, reconstructive process. It's not a passive process of flicking a switch and recalling something in the past. You actually, when you recall something from memory, you actually build it up from scratch. You actually start from a blank slate, right? You actively reconstruct the memory. You have all this information stored all over your brain that's connected by networks in different parts of your brain. And when that network gets stimulated, and anything can stimulate it, you can see somebody, read something in the newspaper, see something on TV, smell something, hear a song, whatever. When that network gets stimulated in some way, the network fires up and this information starts to become recalled. Your networks fire up, they try and pull all that information together to form the memory. So it's really active and reconstructive. But of course, forgetting happens. We know that. We've forgotten a lot of things in our life, and forgetting is a natural phenomenon. And it happens for all sorts of different reasons. So what happens when you're trying to remember an event in your life, but you have truly forgotten certain details? How do you deal with that? Let's introduce schemas, because schemas are what you do to help deal with that scenario. So what are schemas? So let me give you an example. Try to remember your 18th birthday. Now, I'm guessing that just about everybody here is over 18. If you're not, remember your 16th birthday. Try to remember your 18th birthday. Some of you, your 18th birthday was recent. For others, your 18th birthday, like me, was an awfully long time ago. Try to remember what you did, where you were, who you were with, what you ate, what you drank, what you wore, all the circumstances around your 18th birthday. It's generally a pretty big birthday for people. In Australia, 18 is the legal path to adulthood. You can do a lot of things at 18 that you can't do before you're 18. You can make all sorts of legal decisions and do things that you can't do until you turn 18. So it's often a genuinely big birthday. Now, imagine that you have genuinely forgotten what you wore on your 18th birthday, okay, the clothes that you wore. How do you deal with that? How do you fill that gap in your memory? We know that you're going to do it in a way that is consistent and reconstructive, but how do you do it? Well, what happens is that you use a schema to help fill that gap, and I'll come to that in a minute. Now, schemas are an incredibly important mental tool. What schemas are, and we've got thousands of them, what schemas are they are simplified models of your world that you use to make sense of your world. Now, you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of schemas for everything. You've got schemas of people, places, events, objects, abstract notions, your history. They are a cognitive or a mental shortcut that helps you deal with the demands of life. For example, you have a schema of a wedding. Now, that's a schema of a wedding. It may not be your schema of a wedding. It doesn't have to be. Everyone's got a different one. Your schema of a wedding may be in a church. It may involve a religious person. It may involve a same-sex couple. That's a schema of a wedding, but it's not everybody's, right? But it's a simplified representation of a wedding. So if you get invited to a wedding, you know what to expect. You know how to behave. You know what's going to happen. It helps you make sense of your world. There's a schema of a funeral. Same thing. A schema of a dog. A schema of going to the beach, a schema of going to the football. If you go to the football, you've got a schema of what that's like, what people are going to do, how they're going to behave, what you're going to see, what you're going to hear, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what's going to happen, the emotions, and so on. These are simplified representations of your world. They're simple models of your world. We have these schemas, and you have schemas for events in your life as well. They're what we call a cognitive shortcut. They help make your life easier because we have a very, very demanding mental life, and these schemas help make our lives a little easier by giving us a bit of a shortcut. So, for example, let's imagine you're trying to remember your 18th birthday and you've totally forgotten what you were wearing. So what happens? a schema will kick in and it will help fill that gap. So for example, you might have a schema that when I was 18, I was going through, particularly in summer, and my birthday's in summer, and I'm not pointing to me because it's true, but I'm just saying hypothetically, I was going through a Hawaiian shirt phase. Okay, whenever I did anything formal, I wore a Hawaiian shirt, right? 18, summer, Hawaiian shirt. That's my schema, right? If I went out to a pub, if I went out to a restaurant, if I went out with a party, I wore a Hawaiian shirt. That's my schema of me at 18 in summer doing things. That's my simple model of myself. So I fill in the gap of my memory with something that is consistent with that schema. So if somebody says to me, what were you wearing on your 18th birthday? I say, I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt, right? Because that's consistent with my schema. But then somebody shows me a picture of me at my 18th birthday. And I'm not wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I'm wearing a t-shirt or something like that, or a polo top or something. And I go, wow, it's amazing. I could have sworn black and blue I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt. What's happened then? I've had a false memory, okay? But that false memory, which I thought was true, but which I've now been shown to be objectively false, it was consistent with my schema. Okay? So it's very easy for these false memories to develop. So schemas happen because of the active reconstructive nature of memory. And because of schemas, memory is very easy to manipulate. Loftus demonstrated this with a very famous eyewitness testimony studies 50 years ago. It's very easy to distort. False memories can be very easily created. Memory is malleable. Memory is not fixed and set and concrete. It is malleable. So what does this have to do with the concept of repressed memory therapy? Okay, I'm going to give you a very simplistic, stereotypical, hypothetical background scenario, a vignette. And I want to really emphasize that this is highly simplistic, highly stylized, and quite atypical. So here's what I'm outlining here is the sort of scenario that raises the most conflict and controversy. So a person goes to a therapist, and it could be a psychiatrist, a social worker, a psychologist, a counselor, a therapist of any sort, for a host of psychological problems, such as anxiety, minor depression, low self-esteem, relationship difficulties, problems at work, and so on. The therapist says to that person, after listening carefully and so on, that the symptoms that the person is portraying are very typical of what we see in people who have been sexually abused as children. And the client sort of sits back in their chair and looks a bit surprised and says, I have no memory of this ever happening. I had a happy childhood. I had loving family, loving parents, loving friends. I have no memory whatsoever of being sexually abused. And the therapist says, well, it's highly probable that you were sexually abused as a child, but you have in fact repressed the memory. Because the memory was so painful, your psychological system has repressed it, but it's still there and it's still impacting you, and it's playing out in these other things that are happening in your life. It's like a sort of a physical illness. We have to bring it to the surface. We have to deal with it. We have to unlock it. We have to reveal it. And by doing so, we can get to the underlying cause of the trauma and difficulties that you are experiencing. And we need to use therapeutic techniques to recover that memory. So over many therapy sessions, and I'm talking literally hundreds of therapy sessions, using a whole range of techniques, all sorts of hypnosis and rebirthing and a whole range of different techniques, some involving drugs, the client begins to recall very vivid memories of childhood sexual abuse that they feel are absolute ironclad certain truths. Now, I have to emphasize repeatedly, that scenario does not reflect the overwhelming majority of therapeutic situations involving people dealing with trauma, nor does it represent many other situations involving recovered memories. I am dealing with a highly stylized, simplistic, extreme, stereotypical example of what goes on, right? But this scenario that I've painted here has occurred, does continue to occur And so hence I'm using it, but it is at the extreme end. What can cognitive psychology tell us about that scenario? So let's first of all look at some important definitions. What are we talking about when we talk about a repressed memory? We're talking about a memory for a past traumatic event that a person has no apparent recollection of. But the critical thing is we are implying a certain process here. We are saying that the reason why that person can't remember that event is because they have repressed that memory. We'll talk about repression in a minute. This implies that there is a process that is taking place, a process of repression. What is a recovered memory? Now, a recovered memory is a memory for a past traumatic experience that has arisen at a later time, not necessarily as a result of any therapeutic exercise. Now, people recall things from their past in all sorts of different circumstances. What is a false memory? A memory, that's a memory for a past traumatic event. I've said traumatic here, not necessarily, it can be a memory for anything, but in this context, a past traumatic event where there is clear and objective evidence that it did not occur. And what is repressed memory therapy? This is a therapeutic practice that's designed to help people recover repressed memories of past trauma. This is a scenario where the therapist has an actual a priori belief about the concepts of repression, about the existence of repressed memories, what they do, why they happen, how they should be treated. So this is a very targeted therapeutic scenario where the therapist is saying, what's causing your problem is a repressed memory, okay? Repressed memories exist, they do this, here's what they are, we need to use this therapy to help recover them, and only then can we deal with the fundamental cause of what's giving you difficulties in life. Okay, so there's some important definitions. Let's break this down into some key questions. And remember, I'm not looking at this from a therapeutic point of view. I'm not a therapist. I'm not even a psychologist. I am a psychology academic. I'm not a registered practitioner at all. I have a PhD and experience in teaching and research, but I'm not a clinician. But I have a great interest in the psychology of human memory. I'm genuinely interested in that topic. So our discussion here is all about the psychological science of memory, not about the therapeutic or clinical practice. So what are the key questions that we can ask as psychological scientists to help inform our understanding of this area? Well, I've broken it down into a few key questions. First, is it possible for people to suffer amnesia for traumatic experiences? Overwhelming evidence indicates yes, that is the case. In fact, there is a recognized mental health condition called dissociative amnesia. It's recognized in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the primary diagnostic tool for mental disorders that's used by a whole range of mental health practitioners. Now, by the way, it's not the be all and end all. A lot of people are quite critical of the DSM, but at the moment, it is the predominant mechanism by which diagnoses are obtained. And dissociative amnesia is one of those. And here's what dissociative amnesia is. So dissociative amnesia is a type of dissociative disorder that involves inability to recall important personal information that would not typically be lost with ordinary forgetting. It is usually caused by trauma or stress. Diagnosis is based on history after ruling out other causes of amnesia. Treatment is psychotherapy, sometimes combined with hypnosis or drug-facilitated interviews. And then there's a lot more information about dissociative amnesia. Okay, here's an example. On the right-hand side there, you can see a journal article that was published by Linda Williams back in the mid-1990s of an amazing study that really demonstrated the capacity for people to experience amnesia for trauma. Now, first of all, I have no idea how they got this from ethics, but they did. This was a study where the researchers obtained hospital records from a long time ago of situations where children had been admitted to the hospital to be examined and treated for abuse. So it was incontrovertible evidence that these children had been abused because there was hospital records to support this notion. They then tracked down a number of these people 20 years later, something like that. I think it was about 20 years later, and asked them about their hospital experience. Over a third, about 38%, over a third of the people who they tracked down had no memory of the hospital admission, had no memory of the circumstances surrounding the hospital admission. Over a third, okay? Even though there was absolute, objective, incontrovertible, truthful evidence to say that this happened to you, it happened to you when you were a child, you were hospitalized, we know what happened as part of the hospitalization and examination. 1/3 reported no memory. Yes, so it seems to be the case that people can suffer amnesia for traumatic experiences. The reality is that most people do not. Most people are in fact haunted by their memories of trauma. It impacts them on a daily basis, it impacts their entire lives. The other problem is that it's very difficult to know when you're asking a person about their memory of a trauma, whether they're actually telling you the truth. We're relying on their self-report. If I'm a participant and you say to me, John, did you experience this childhood trauma when you were 6 years old? And I say, no, I didn't. How do you know I'm telling you the truth? How do you know I'm not lying? So we're really relying on people's honesty of self-report, okay? But like I said, yes, dissociative amnesia can happen, but it's not common. And the fact is that most people who experience trauma, they don't forget it, they remember it. They remember it all too well, and it impacts them greatly on a daily basis, and they seek help for that, right? And there's that enormous literature of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. But the answer to that question is yes. If that's the case, is that amnesia the result? Sorry, let me start again. If we accept that amnesia can occur, why does it occur? Is it the result of some process of repression, or is it just normal forgetting? This we don't know. Now, repression, the concept of repression, that's actually a Freudian notion. It goes all the way back to Sigmund Freud. Freud first came up with the notions of repression and repressed memory. He didn't actually call it repressed memory, he called it something else, as a result of examining clients who had been to war, okay? Crimean War, First World War, people like that, where soldiers who had returned from war reported a complete amnesia of their experience. And as a result of that, Freud came up with this notion. He called it motivated forgetting, but it's now called repressed memory, where the soldiers had experienced events that were so horrible, so traumatic, that they simply couldn't deal with it. And their memory systems protected them by shutting it out, by repressing it. But they were still there. They were sitting in the background, exerting an influence and causing all sorts of other problems. That's a Freudian notion. Now, the problem with Freudian notions is that they're incredibly difficult to corroborate using traditional experimental methodologies and scientific techniques. They're largely theoretical. However, recently, very recently, there's been some fascinating neuroscience evidence that's indicating that memory for trauma may be different from normal memories, and that forgetting trauma may be different from normal forgetting. And this research has come from what we call functional MRI research. Functional MRI research is research that allows people to actually observe the brain in action. And you can see an example on the right-hand side there of fMRI technique happening, and the bits that are sort of in color are the bits of the brain that are being active while a person is engaging in certain mental activities. And what this research has shown us is that traumatic memories seem to be stored in different parts of the brain than everyday memories. Now, if that's the case, then the forgetting may be different as well. If the storage is different, the forgetting may be different. This is new, this is cutting edge, but this could really illuminate our understanding of traumatic memory and how it operates, and tell us more about dissociative amnesia. Next question, do forgotten memories for trauma resurface? So if you have experienced an amnesia of a traumatic event, you've forgotten it, can it just resurface? Absolutely. All memories can. There's nothing particularly special about that. And the circumstances that explain that are just normal memory processes, and they're completely separate from any therapeutic situation. Okay, that happens to us all the time. I mean, how many times have you sat down and all of a sudden the memory just popped into your head and you've said, my goodness, I haven't thought of that for years. Why did that memory all of a sudden out of nowhere pop into my head? Okay, you might have seen something on the TV or on the computer, or heard a particular song, or went to a particular place, saw a particular person, smelt something, whatever, touched something, and all of a sudden a memory comes back. The very famous book by Marcel Proust, Remembrance of Things Past. The whole novel begins with Proust, or Proust's character, going down to breakfast at a seaside resort in France and biting into a cakey biscuit called a Madeleine, a citrus-flavoured cakey biscuit, and the very bite of that biscuit unleashes a flood of memories that basically forms the entire story. Okay, so that's just a normal event. Here's a critical question. Can the memories of trauma resurface as a result of engaging in repressed memory therapy? Well, in theory, yes. And there is clinical case study evidence where this has occurred and where the recovered material has been shown to be accurate. But, and here's the important but, it's nearly impossible from a scientific point of view to demonstrate a causal connection between the repressed memory therapy and the accurate recall of forgotten trauma. What I mean by that is that the trauma might have been recalled by any sort of therapy. It might have been recalled by any therapeutic exercise. It might have been recalled by sitting down with a therapist over a cup of coffee and having a chat. What we can't say with any certainty at all, scientific certainty, is that that particular targeted therapy was specifically causing the recovery of that particular memory. Right? There's all sorts of other alternative explanations. Here's another question. So, can false memories be implanted? Absolutely. As I've demonstrated, this has been done in the laboratory countless times, and there's tons of real-world evidence that false memories can happen. And the situation is, the problem is that the whole scenario that surrounds a repressed memory therapy situation is an ideal, it's fertile ground for memories to be manipulated and altered and changed. You've got a situation where you've got a person who wants help. They're vulnerable. You know, that's what they've come to therapy for. You know, they've got a problem. They're seeking help for that problem and they want answers. They see the therapist as the person who's going to help them. You've got a therapist who has this belief in the concept of repression and repressed memory and the value of repressed memory therapy. And there's a power nexus there. There's a therapeutic relationship, but it's a service user and a service provider. And the sort of situation, it's like memories getting shaped. It's like what happens when you train a circus animal, or when you train your dog or something like that. You use behavioral conditioning and shaping to develop more complex behaviors. Now, this scenario is almost like that. It's like the shaping of memory, so that, you know, you have these hundreds of sessions where the therapist is saying, look, this has been caused by a repressed memory. We've got to get to that repressed memory. So we're going to go back. We're going to go back to your childhood. I want you to think about things in your childhood that might have been the cause of this trauma. Let's talk about things. And you start to talk about things. You say something like, well, I sort of have this really vague memory that I was, you know, in the bath one night, and I remember feeling a bit uncomfortable because my stepfather was sort of hanging around outside the door. And the therapist goes, good. Let's go into that in more detail. And then I remember he came in and he said he didn't know that I was there, but he seemed to stay in there longer than he should have. And the therapist is reinforcing this and shaping the memory and shaping the response. And this goes on for hours and hours, over weeks and weeks and maybe years. And that situation, all of a sudden, those memories start to become more shaped and more developed to the point that they really become, and you as the service, you believe them. You know, you believe these memories have happened because you're getting constantly affirmed and reinforced about these memories as they occur. And that's what happens. You know, if you look at the case studies, the more controversial case studies of repressed memory therapy, that's exactly the sort of situation that has taken place. So let's get down to the critical question. Has repressed memory therapy been shown to be valid and accurate? Using conventional scientific means? Absolutely not. However, there are case studies where several independent third parties have affirmed the recovered memories. But despite that, the important issue of the cause and effect relationship between the therapy and the outcome has never been properly dealt with. That is, the memories may have resurfaced anyway. They may have resurfaced under a range of circumstances, just associated with normal remembering. The therapy might have simply speeded the process along, given it a kick or something like that. But on the other side of that coin, have repressed memories been shown to be inaccurate? Absolutely, on numerous occasions. And there are many, many case examples of fully corroborated inaccuracies of the most egregious nature in the memories that are recalled through repressed memory therapy. And some of the recovered memories that you read about in the case studies strain credibility. We're talking memories of aliens, of satanic rituals, of mass ritualistic murder, and so on. I'm not kidding. It really does go pretty extreme. As a result of some of the more controversial cases, most professional organisations, such as the Australian Psychological Society, the Royal Australian College of Psychiatrists, the Australian Association of Social Workers, the counselling body, Australian Counselling Association, and PACFA, and so on, the professional associations have got very, very strict guidelines around the use of practices for treating people with traumatic experiences and with amnesia for traumatic experiences. Here's an example on the right-hand side here. This is a fairly lengthy document put out by the Australian Psychological Society, the peak body representing the interests of psychologists in Australia, psychology in Australia, providing ethical guidelines for psychological practice for clients who disclose memories related to traumatic experiences. And it has very, very strict guidelines that all members must adhere to. If they don't adhere to that, they can be deregistered. They can be removed from membership of the APS, and they can be deregistered as psychologists, and similar consequences can happen with people who are members of other professional bodies, such as the counselling professional bodies, the social work professional bodies, the psychiatry professional bodies, and so on. However, one of the problems with this area is that there are a lot of people who operate as, quote, therapists, who actually require no professional registration or membership of a professional organisation. You can't stick a needle into somebody without having the proper qualifications. You can't call yourself a psychologist without being registered. You can't call yourself a social worker without being a member of the AASW. But anybody can call themselves a therapist. There's no restriction on that. You can't be a member of the professional organisation, but you can actually call yourself that. You can call yourself a life coach. So there's all sorts of people who can, with minimal qualifications, with minimal experience, can call themselves therapists and who can engage in these sorts of therapeutic practices with no oversight from an accrediting body or from a registering agency. And that's very dangerous. That's a very, very dangerous situation that we find ourselves in. So, what do we conclude? Memory is a very active and reconstructive process. False memories are common. They occur. They're natural. Repressed memory therapy is an unsubstantiated and potentially dangerous approach to helping people deal with trauma and related mental health issues. There are much, much better ways to help people deal with trauma. There are well-established, empirically validated methods, approved methods, properly investigated methods to help people deal with trauma. Repressed memory therapy is not one of those. And professional organisations have very strict guidelines for dealing with dissociative amnesia and other related conditions. Okay, so that's the end of my session. I have a few minutes to scan your questions and look at your comments. I hope that you've been using the chat function to ask questions of various courses and other administrative questions throughout the session. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the chat and have a scan at what you've been saying. I haven't looked at it yet, and there's quite a bit of chat questions there, so I'll have a quick scan of that and answer a few questions. However, just before I do that, if you would like to speak with me about courses in psychology, about studying psychology, about any of the stuff that we've talked about tonight, really about anything to do with studying psychology at ACAP, you're very, very welcome to email me. My email address is there, john.reece@acap.edu.au. I can't answer you any questions. Sorry, I can't answer any questions of a sort of an administrative nature. If you ask me how much are the fees, I don't know, right? So administrative questions, you're much better to email connect@acap.edu.au or ring that 1-800 number. But if it's a question about the course content, about your study options in psychology, about what you'll study, about what we study, about the different units, about the pathways, about becoming a psychologist, about all those sorts of areas that are specific to psychology, I'm very, very happy to answer any questions that you may have about that, and you're most welcome to contact me via that email address. Okay, so I'm going to open up the chat now, and I'm going to have a quick look at what people had a look. I'm going to go all the way back to the start and then scoot through. Okay, so just we just got some early comments there from things. So there's some nice words there from one of our attendees who's a current student about the support for people living with disabilities via accessibility. Very important to be aware of, and a link to that. Yes, this has been recorded. And there's a link there in the chat about where you can find the recording. Okay. Okay. People excited to learn more about the topic. Good, good. Okay, so somebody's asked a question about can techniques such as free association help in retrieving memories? Look, I don't know. I don't know to that person. Look, as I said, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a practitioner. But I do know that if you do this sort of training, that you will learn the appropriate techniques for helping people with dissociative amnesia and other related traumatic experiences. I generally can't remember anything about my 18th birthday. You know, neither can I. And it's not because it happened 42 years ago. It's because of a bottle of Stone's Green ginger wine. Oh, so a question about, do the counselling or psychology courses have exams? Counselling does not. There are no exams in counselling, but about half of the units in undergraduate psychology do have exams. Oh, the example fMRI that I showed you was, look, I just picked a good picture of an fMRI. I'm not sure whether that was taken from a traumatic memory study. So I just wanted to show you what fMRI looked at. Question that begins with, as a therapist, I've got to stop it right there because I'm not a therapist. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that one. I'm a psychological scientist. Okay, there's a link again where you can find the recording, which will be available next week. Okay, so really good question. Somebody's just talking about having finished undergrad psych at another uni, and that was only covered briefly, but the main message was that repressed memories brought up in therapy were unlikely to be true. What are your thoughts on that? I don't think you can make a sweeping statement that they're always going to be untrue. I think that there are many instances where they are false, but there are also case studies that have been shown that they are, in fact, accurate. But like I said, the critical thing is we don't know whether that's been specifically caused by that targeted type of therapy or whether it just would have happened anyway. So that is always the critical thing. What we look for in psychological research is cause and effect, where we can really use research design to demonstrate specific cause and effect relationships between events. So Jenna, that's a very personal question that you've asked there, personal to yourself. I'm not really in a position to answer that sort of question. That's really the sort of question that I would strongly advise that you speak to a qualified professional about. I don't really think there's anything that psychological science can really do to answer that question directly. And yes, memory is taught in cognitive processes. So somebody's asked me my opinion on repressed memories being recovered in someone diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. I think that, first of all, I don't think that what we're talking about here is repressed memories. I think we're just talking about amnesia, people stating that they don't have a memory for a traumatic event. I think when we use the term repressed memory, we're really implying a process. And I think that process is questionable, certainly from a scientific point of view. I think it's highly questionable. So I think what we're talking about here is not so much repressed memories being recovered, it's just amnesia being treated for somebody with dissociative identity disorder. And again, that's a sort of a therapeutic situation that I really don't have any understanding or background in. I really can't speak about things like that because I'm not a therapist, I'm not a clinician. Okay, so a good question from Stephanie about people who are undecided on whether they want to go through a research or a clinical path. I think what you'll find, Stephanie, is that you will, the starting point of that is the same for everybody. So everybody has to do the basic undergraduate degree in psychology to start with. You'll probably find when you do that, that you'll make a decision about which direction you want to go in. So I think you'll find that will unfold for yourself as you go through. Forgotten memories can be remembered by a taste or smell because they're what they call prompts or primes. And those smells and that will just cause a network section where memories are stored to be stimulated. And then that starts a whole series of network connections happening. And that's how it can happen. And of course, this is a very brief session where we've only really touched on things. When you come and study it in more detail, you obviously get into it in much more depth and detail. I actually have supervised some research on repressed memories for honours students. I've done a couple of projects where we have actually surveyed different types of practitioners on their beliefs, attitudes and practices around repressed and recovered memories and repressed and recovered memory therapy. And we actually got some very, very surprising results. That was some time ago. I haven't done it recently, but we did some interesting things there. I think if you just get onto Professor Google and just type in, repressed memory therapy or recovered memory therapy or something like that, you'll get some very, very good hits, particularly if you go to the more, respected sort of psychological sources. It's the internet, so there's a lot of wacky stuff out there, but if you go to that sort of more reputable stuff, I think you'll find some very useful information. Okay, so 7:59, we'll wrap it up there. So thank you all very much for attending. I really appreciate your attendance. I appreciate your great questions, some really terrific questions there. And I hope that many of you come and study with us and ask great questions in the class, because that's what it's all about. So please feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions from the things we've talked about tonight. Please feel free to email connect@ACAP if you've got a question about studying. And I wish you all the very best in whatever future directions you choose to take. And have a very good evening, everybody.